Hello everyone, welcome to Study Capital YouTube platform. My name is Atul Mishra and I am your mentor for CUET PG 2025 MA English Entrance Examination. In this video, we are going to discuss syllabus in detail. We are also going to talk about the recent changes that they have made in your entrance examination. Syllabus. If you are visiting this channel for the very first time, don't forget to subscribe and press on bell icon. Now, yes, so from their website you can see the code for your paper is LAQP01, and when you see the question paper, the syllabus basically, they have made few changes, but we'll start with unit by unit. So you can see the very first unit is History of English and Indian Literatures. Within it, it is basically the subunits are major authors and text, literary movements and ages. Now you can divide this unit into two parts: History of English Literature and then History of Indian Literature. Now when you think of history of English literature, I hope you are aware about the fact that whenever we are thinking about history of English literature, we think about history of British English literature, right? So within it we have multiple ages beginning from Anglo-Saxon period to the postmodern period, right? So you have Anglo-Saxon period, Anglo-Norman period, the complete Middle Ages, within which you have age of Chaucer, age of darkness, then you have Queen Elizabethan period, Jacobean period, Cavalier period, 11 years of democracy within between 1649 to 1660. Then you have Restoration period. After that you have age of Pope, age of Samuel Johnson, some part of pre-romantics, then romantic literature, Victorian period, then modern period and postmodern period. Now you see this is around, when you start reading British literature, you go back to 55 BC when the original inhabitants were living there, right? But the literature actually starts with the Anglo-Saxon period, or what we call Old English period. So it's a rich history of around more than 2000 years. So you need to know about the historical facts related to it, to every age, events, literary events, historical event and their impact on literature. Now the subunits that they have mentioned, you can see they have mentioned major authors and text. For example, in every age you have certain amount of writers, right? In the very beginning, when literature was oral, like before 1476, when there was no printing press available, Caxton was the one who introduced printing press in England in 1476. The world after that, we have a lot of writers coming and writing, but before that you have very few writers in existence. For example, you have Chaucer and the contemporary of Chaucer's, and before that you have writers who are writings which are anonymous. You have no writers, name are not available, right? But when you reach to the Elizabethan period, you see there are lot of writers coming into existence. So you have Shakespeare, you have university wits, you have Spencer, you have Sidney in Queen Elizabethan period. In when you move ahead, you have Ben Jonson in the Jacobean period. Then you have Milton in the Puritan period. Later on you have Dryden and the contemporaries of Dryden in the Restoration period, people like Shadwell and others. When you move ahead, you have Alexander Pope. Then you have Samuel Johnson and lot of writers in romantics including Wordsworth, Coleridge, Southey, and then in Victorian period you have Browning and Tennyson, and the list goes on. So you can think about 50 or more than 50 major writers in British history particularly, right? There are minor writers as well, especially after Queen Elizabethan period. So you see there are around 20 writers within Elizabethan period, around 20 to 30 writers within romantics and Victorian period together. Think of Thomas Carlyle, for example, Winston Churchill, Bram Stoker. Last year there was one question from Dracula. So there are around in history there are around 50 major writers, and then within every age around 10-15 minor writers as well. So how do you going to define who is major, who is minor, is one question that is there. It's still you are struggling with. But they have mentioned about major authors and text, and then literary movements and ages. What does it mean? So you see from the very beginning, from Anglo-Saxon period to the modern and especially postmodern period, you have lot of movements, and there are literary movements, right? Literary movements in the sense related to literature. So you have, for example, when you think of, I will give you example of modern period only. So in modern literature, beginning from 1901 to 1950, you have around 10 movements together which are literary. Beginning from, for example, you think of decadent movement, you think of Imagism, Dadaism, Surrealism, Negritude movement of the 1910s, Black Mountain poetry. In 1920s, you have Lost Generation. In 1930s, you have Auden Group's poetry and the movement that they are associated with. 1940s, you have, for example, New Apocalypse poetry. 1950s, you have movement poetry, confession poetry, kitchen sink drama, angry young movement, and the list again goes on. Memory plays and their movement associated with it. There's a long list associated with literary movements, and obviously with ages. When we think of history of British English literature, we have ages divided on the name of writers, on particularly by the king or queen who are ruling over there, or even after the literary movements such as Romanticism. So you have around a lot of literature that you need to cover when you think of history of English literature. Now, when you think of history of Indian literature, within India, as you can see, there are 22 languages that are prescribed by Sahitya Academy. The award is given into 22 languages. Now, literature, Indian literature, particularly Indian English literature, you also have a rich history, although not of 2000 years, but obviously with the introduction of English in India, you see writers have started writing in English. So how they were using English in the beginning, and then how they have made changes. So the background related to that, Macaulay's Minute, Wood's Patch, and many theoretical ideas that are related to English language in India is something that you need to remember. And then obviously the major writers associated with the English writing, and the literary movements that are associated with it. For example, Indian Renaissance. So the influence of Gandhi on Indian literature. You see, before Indian independence, you have a very different kind of writing. The social aspect of writing was there. So Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao, R.K. Narayan, they were writing about the social issues. But a change happened once after the independence, and you see writers like Anita Desai came and they started talking about the psychological aspect of characters, right? So for example, Cry the Beloved Word, you think of Anita Desai's novel, they are very good example of that. And then you see 1970s, you have Salman Rushdie writing, and then the tribe of Salman Rushdie, we have writers who are highly influenced by Salman Rushdie. Then now you see, after that you have Arvind Adiga, Arundhati Roy. Especially these days we have Anuradha Roy and many other contemporary writers. You can check the list of Sahitya Academy Award writers in English, and these are writers which are important for you that you have to cover for your examination. Especially in Indian literature, beginning from, for example, Rabindranath Tagore to Sarojini Naidu to Kamala Das, and many other writers that you need to cover for your entrance examination. This is what this unit suggests. So you see, there is one. They have mentioned it in only 3 lines, but there is so much information that you need to cover. Along with it, try to understand that it is history of English and Indian literature. So and then you have especially a different unit called Indian writing in English. That means Indian writing other than English is also important for you. Last year there was one question from one magazine which is Regional Bengali magazine. Okay, so Bengali writers who were writing in English. There was one question from Mamangdai yesterday, in our last entrance examination. It means writers, not only those writers who are writing in English, and there were a lot of questions from Hindi literature as well. So prominent writers in India, including major languages. So first, for example, there was one question in net examination related to first Odia Dalit novel. So that means they can incorporate these things in your CUT PG examination as well. You need to know about the major writers of who are writing in Hindi, in Odia, in Bengali, and many other Indian languages. This is also, that is a part of your syllabus, and this unit was already there in the past. They were not asking questions from especially from other regional languages, but in the last entrance examination there were 2 questions from Hindi literature, and there was 1 question from Bengali literature as well. That means you need to give a little bit attention to other languages as well. Then the second unit suggests Indian writing in English, and within it you can see you need to read the major authors, as I mentioned, the Nizam Ezekiel, Kamala Das, Anita Desai, Arvind Adiga, Salman Rushdie. There are many other writers that you will be reading when you will be reading Indian writing in English. Within novels you have many writers like Raja Rao, Mulk Raj Anand, and others. In poetry you think of Jayant Mahapatra, Nizam Ezekiel, Kamala Das, Sarojini Naidu. So you have a great list of writers in India writing in English. You need to cover them and their text as well. And then the second unit, as you can see, sub-unit, major text including English translations, classical and modern. So you see there are writings in English today. So you see Girish Karnad, for example, or Mohan Rakesh, Badal Sarkar and his third theatre. They were writing in regional languages, in Marathi, in Hindi, or in Kannada languages, but then they started translating those texts in English for the wider audience. So it was, what you need to know is that the premier text, the important text written in different languages and how they are translated, who translated them, is a very important question. For example, the text of Badal Sarkar and how Girish Karnad translating them, the text written by Girish Karnad and how he translating some of his texts. It is very similar to what we read in post-colonial literature, right? So how, for example, the debate between Thiango and Chinua Achebe, how Thiango, after writing Petals of the Blood, his fourth novel, started writing in his Gikyu language, in his mother tongue, while Achebe continued writing in his English language. So the debate there, and then how we can incorporate the same debate within Indian English literature. That is a very interesting unit, and not only the modern writers doing that, but the classical interpretation of it as well. And you will understand it with the next unit that they have provided, criticism, Indian and British criticism. I will come back to that again in order to explain this topic. Now, you see Indian writing in English, and then they have mentioned the history, the part that I have shared with all of you, how English was introduced to us when they came to within India in 1600, East India Company, you might be knowing that. Then how the Butler English was there, how they have used English language to colonize us. Then how English language has replaced Persian language as language of education within India, and then what is the status of English today, the new colleges that they have built, every information related to the historical background, the Wood Dispatch, the Macaulay's Minute, and the Charter Acts that were happening, and their contribution in Indian use of English language. That is very important element that they have added in your syllabus, and including the new unit that they have provided, Indian Diaspora. So you know diaspora writing, right? Diaspora writing is basically in context to India, writers who are born in India and now they are living in different countries and writing about India. You might be knowing about the Zirmitia migration, how V.S. Naipaul was was a product of it, and he is writing about India. The way he is representing India is you see a very negative portrayal, but there are writers who are writing very positively about India. You see Bharti Mukherjee is there, Kiran Desai is there, Anita Desai is there. These are Indian born American writers, or for example Indian born British writers. You have Salman Rushdie. So Indian writers who are primarily born in India, or their parents were born in India, now they are living in different country and they are writing about India. You need to know about those writers, their major text, for example the namesake, and then also because they have added Indian diaspora. So what are the theoretical framework related to diaspora? What is the idea of homeland, hostland? What is ambiguity? So you read Homi K. Bhabha. Homi K. Bhabha's nation and narration theory. Nation and narration, where it talks about what is mimicry, what is liminality, what is ambiguity. So very important post-colonial terms that are related to the concept of Indian diaspora. They become very important for you. So you need to know what is alienation, what is identity crisis in context to Indian diasporic writings. Now you can see Indian diaspora is not only about Indian writers, Indian in living in America or in Britain. You have so many countries, right? So Indian born Canadian writer, for example, you can think of writers who are born in India and now living in Canada, right? Similarly, Indian born Trinidadian writers. V.S. Naipaul is a product of it, although V.S. Naipaul was not born in India. His grandparents have shifted to to different places, to Trinidad and Tobago, because of the Girmitia migration. So the layers of migration within India, right, how it happened during that time frame when it was a replacement for slavery, and the contemporary Indian migration practices. So you have Arjun Appudurai talking about 5 escapes. You have Azaz Khan talking about it in theory. So you have new theorists also that you need to read to support that Indian diasporic writings. They have only mentioned Indian diaspora. There is no explanation whether you need to read the writers of Indian diaspora or the theory associated with diaspora particularly, and then diaspora related to India. This is one thing that is ambiguous here. So for your safety, you need to read about the theoretical framework, as I mentioned about Azaz Ahmad, Arjuna Pudurai, Homike Bhabha, and many other theorists. And then you will try to locate the idea of homeland, hostland, ambiguity that we are talking about, and how one person associate himself with India or from the place that they have shifted. So acculturation, what is acculturation, how Indian people are losing. For example, I'll give you a very important text, the name Sheikh and Trishanku as well. You'll see in both these texts what happens, there are people who are from India and now they have shifted to different country. Now there are different generations. So how first generation respond to it, how second generation responds to it, and how third generation respond to it. So people, for example, in case of Trishanku, there is one couple, they shift to a place called Canada, right? Within Canada they are living, and then after that you find that they have two children, and then their parents who are living in India, they visit them in Canada. So the parents, they were they were feeling very irritated there. Why? Because the kind of atmosphere that they are getting there, they are not useful to that. Then their children, their child and their basically her his wife, they are somehow in ambiguity, they are in liminal space. So they were born in India but they have settled in Canada. And then their children, for example, the third generation, they are very happy living in Canada because they can, as he mentioned, that they can learn different languages, they can speak in different languages without any caste barrier, without any barrier at all. So you see how Diaspora talks about the experience of different generation. This is there are theories related to it as well, and there are many texts that you can read in literature that support these idea of homeland, hostland, and the experiences of different generation. So because there is no explanation given here, you need to read about those theorists and the literature that supports it. Okay, and it is a new unit that they have added. And then you see literary terms and figure of speech. This is another unit. It was there already in your syllabus before as well. Now they have mentioned around 20 terms. As I have already mentioned in some of previous videos as well, you can check on YouTube, it is available in our series. You see, allegory is not simply allegory, right? Ballad, blank verse, comedy, dissociation of sensibility, dramatic monologue, elegy. You see these terms, you'll find it in M.H. Ibrahim's as well. And when you will read the M.H. Ibrahim entry, you'll find they take you to different places, right? For example, only dissociation of sensibility is mentioned here, right? But you need to know about the association of sensibility. You need to know about T.S. Eliot in order to understand this particular term called dissociation of sensibility. You see, comedy. Now comedy can be considered as a genre particularly, right? Comedy, what comedy? Comedy written in 16th century, comedy written in 17th century, comedy written in 18th century, or what is the characteristic of comedy? Comedy written by Shakespeare, how they are different from Ben Jonson. What I am trying to say, that it is a very vague term that they have given, like the way anything can be a term. You can think of any moment and you try to locate that moment, that whether this thing has happened in literature or not, and you will find that can also be concluded as a term. So anything can be a term. What you can think about it, when you try to give more emphasis about these things, you find if it is intentional fallacy is mentioned, that means you need to read about affective fallacy as well, pathetic fallacy as well. You need to read about what Arnold talks about historic, personal, and real estimate, and how he called historic and personal as fallacy. This is also that you need to cover when you are reading intentional fallacy. Obviously the background of it is very important, so you need to know who coined the term, where the term was coined, who is the writer who is associated with it, and literary literary ideas to support it, literary examples to support it. This is something that you can add on it. Think about the imitation. So imitation is a very vague term. You have theory of mimesis beginning from Plato to Aristotle, and then there are a lot of writers who talked about how poetry is an imitation, and you need to think about their definitions and what they are trying to suggest. You see, there is dramatic monologue. So there are poems which are considered as dramatic monologues. There are certain characteristics to it, and then the writers who are writing dramatic monologues. Same goes with verse. So you blank verse, there are many other verse available. Free verse is there, and how it is different from rhyme, and what is rhyme, types of rhyme. This is something that you also need to cover. It goes on for every every literary term. That means they have only mentioned, for example, figure of speech. Metaphor is a figure of speech. Metonymy is a figure of speech. Simile is a figure of speech. and there are around more than pun, hyperbole, and you can think of any figure of speech. Last year there was one question from definitions of figure of speech. So they have mentioned there was one question in matching. One side there were four figure of speech, and one side there were definition to it, and you need to match them in match them in order to correct them. There was another question where they have given examples, and you need to find out which figure of speech is being used there. So there were two questions from the same subunit as they have mentioned. So it is not simply that you know the definition of figure of speech. That means you need to know the types of figure of speech, their literary examples, in order to understand what that particular figure of speech means. Same goes with satire, soliloquy. The examples of soliloquy, you can only locate them in Hamlet, but there are many other texts where you find soliloquy. So how soliloquy is different from aside, for example. They have not mentioned aside here, but you need to differentiate soliloquy from aside in order to understand it. So this is how you try to understand these terms. You might try to find out different writers who are associated with it, different literary examples. So it is also, it looks like that it's a very small unit, but it is not. You need to give a lot of time to understand these things. Then you see the next unit is of literary genres. So you can read literature from two different ways. First, you read them by by age. So you read who are the writers who are writing in Shakespearean period, who are the writers writing in Dryden period, or for example, age of Pope, St. Augustine period, age of sensibility, romantics. This is one way of reading a text. There's another way of reading a text or reading age is first you try to read the historical background of age, and then you try to find out what kind of literature is produced. You can divide it into certain parts, right? The drama, for example, I'll give you example of Elizabethan period. When you think of drama, you think of university wits and Shakespeare. When you think of poetry, you think of Shakespeare, you think of Philip Sidney, you think of Spenser. When you think of, for example, essay, you think of Bacon, you think of Montaigne, you think of many other minor essays as well. When you, for example, thinking about short story, and that is how you go, right? That is how you'll try to locate literature. This is one way of reading literature. This is one way you can read from Anglo-Saxon period to the postmodern period, and you can find that these are literary genres. But now it is a part of, as they have mentioned, it is already there in this unit when they have talked about history of English literature and ages. That means this is already being done. So what does it mean when they give you a different unit for that? That means you need to read what is fiction, how fiction is different from non-fiction. What is life writing? Life writing can be memoir, can be autobiography, can be biography, or many other things. Diary, whenever you think of diary, you can think of restoration period. Pepys and Pepys writing entry, right? Evelyn Waugh and he's writing diary entry. They used to ask these questions in the net examination from the diary entry. How Pepys, he went to watch some of the very famous plays by Shakespeare, and he has written very wrong and you say negative comments about them. They used to ask these questions in the net examination. But you need to understand what is the genre of diary and the writers who are writing it. Famous diary entries. Drama. Now drama, it starts with the ancient time frame, right? Drama was used to perform, basically the purpose was to perform, and then you see there are multiple types of drama within 20th century. You can think of epic theater, you can think of theater of operas, theater of cruelty, and absurd theater, poor theater. This is few examples of theater in the 20th century. But not only the types of theater, but when you think about, for example, drama, how it originates, the writers associated with it, types of drama. So in most of these genres, what you need to find out, because you have already read the history and ages associated with it, so till now you are aware about the writers, you know their works. You need to remember, for example, if you think of William Wordsworth, you should know the poetry written by William Wordsworth, you should know the novels written by Wordsworth, you should also know the drama written by William Wordsworth. Now you will be probably thinking that William Wordsworth is primarily known for his poetry, but all these Victorian writers and romantic writers, you will find, especially from romantics and Victorian, they are famous for poetry. You think of Wordsworth, you think of Coleridge, you think of Keats, Shelley, Browning, Tennyson, Matthew Arnold. They all are primarily famous for poetry. But very recent development that they started asking question from their plays, from their novels. So you see, Wordsworth has written a play called The Borderers. Stratford is a play written by Browning. Moth is a play written by Tennyson. Cincy is a play written by Keats. Shelley. Manfred is a play written by Shelley. So you see, and also novels written by Shelley. Essays written by non-fiction written by Shelley when he was expelled from Oxford University. So these writers, they are famous for writing poetry, but nowadays they are asking questions from their novels, from their minor works as well. So when you look at these genre, particularly travelogue, short story, prose, poetry, novel, and then the types of novels, examples for that, there were last year there was a question related to the novel types. So there were 4 novels given, and you need to find out whether they are epistolary, whether they are picaresque or gothic, and then you need to find out the origination, from where they originated. For example, Horace Walpole's novel started the gothic genre. So many other genres, first epistolary novel, first picaresque novel, writers who were writing epistolary novel, picaresque novel, they can ask you to eliminate or find out the commonalities between these writers. This is also one question that they have asked in previous entrance examination. So you need to look at them, these genres, especially you see science fiction. Last year there was one question which was very difficult for others to solve, and the reason was primarily because they were asking questions. They have asked question from one unit of science fiction, one subgenre called the speculative fiction. So within it, you see these are new genres beginning from the dystopian fiction. You have utopia, you have dystopia, you also have heterotopia by Foucault. Read about it. Okay, so you see from dystopian fiction, which is a part of science fiction. You see speculative fiction, which is a part of science fiction. So you need to know about the writers. H.G. Wells, who is known as the father of science fiction, new developments, post-apocalyptic novel, Octavia Butler, future Afrofuturism, J.J. Farrell, for example. So you have a lot of writers writing science fiction, beginning from 1960s and 70s. You need to read those writers as well, the sub-categories of science fiction as well. This is what this unit suggest. Okay, then the 5th unit is about comparative literature and translation studies. Before last year's entrance examination, they were asking questions related to the theoretical framework of comparative literature and translation studies. For example, you have certain schools in comparative literature, you have certain writers, they are coming up with new translation methods. Susan Bassnett talks about the cultural turn in translation studies. Similarly, the translatory turn in culture studies. So how translators were primarily passive before, but now they became active, their role and the theories associated with it. We have Dryden, Pope. So how 17th century 17th century translation was different from 18th century translation. Translation of Bible is beginning from Wycliffe to Coverdale, right? The first translation was from Latin to English. Then Tyndale's Bible translation, why he was buried. Coverdale's translation, which is a complete, translation, first published translation in English. And then also James One's authorized version of Bible. This is one such example, Bible translation. Other than that, there are many translation practices as well, methods as well. Fidelity, felicity, difference between them. This is what we used to read before last year's entrance examination. What they have, when you look back the question paper of last year, there were around 4 questions based on the idea of translation as a practice. So they have asked questions related to the practice of translation, terminology associated to translation, right? What is, for example, transcript? Back translation, and the types of translation and how you do that. First we were thinking about the literary examples to support it, but now you need to think about the practical adaptations. So the literary terms associated with translation studies is also something that is very, very important, and you need to remember now, because they have introduced question related to that in your last entrance examination. That's why you see not only major concepts and theories related to comparative and translation, but also major text. And here they have not mentioned, but there were 3 questions based on the terminology associated with translation and comparative literature. If you'll only check last year's question paper, you'll find what I'm trying to suggest here. Okay, then you see literary criticism and theory. So they have before talking about the new edition of Indian criticism, classical and modern, you just to think about Marxism. It is mentioned here, Marxism, structuralism, post-structuralism. There is no mention of new criticism here. There is no mention of formalism. Structuralism started, it is actually a takeaway from formalism. So you need to know about formalism in order to understand structuralism, but it is not mentioned here. As you can see in the literary terms, literary terms and figure of speech, there is intentional fallacy, there is what you say, dissociation of sensibility. These are two important terms associated with new criticism. So there are two branches of new criticism. First, it is started in Britain, where you read people like T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, and others. And then there are 1940s new criticism, where you have American new criticism, writers like, for example, Brooks is there, Warren is there, Ransom is there. So you need to read about them and their concepts as well, because last year there was one question from psychoanalysis. You see, one question related to Sigmund Freud. When you see literary criticism and theory, there is no mention of psychoanalysis, but there was one question from psychoanalysis in your entrance examination related to uncanny, what you say, parapraxis, how unconscious reveal itself. So it reveals through dreams, through slip of the tongue, and that is the question that they have asked in your entrance examination. But you see, there is no mention of it here in literary criticism and theory. So how you can relate with it? When you read, when you start reading structuralism, you need to understand what is formalism, what is new criticism, in order to understand structuralism and in order to understand post-structuralism. One more thing that I'll tell you, there was one more question that I can think of at the moment related to the chronology of literary criticism. So you have formalism, you have new criticism, you have structuralism, post-structuralism, reader response theory, new historicism. These are the movements, important movements. You need to know about the concepts related to it, the writers associated with it, the text that they have written, along with the when they appeared, which movement came first, writers associated with it, and everything that can be a part of it. So maybe they have not mentioned reader response theory here, not mentioned new historicism here, not mentioned formalism and new criticism, but you will check your question paper and you'll realize that these are also important theories, because they are related to these theoretical frameworks. So in order to understand these things, you need to remember them as well. For example, you read Marxism, and if you leave new left Marxist and the idea related to them, cultural studies, BCCC, Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, Stuart Hall, Raymond Williams, Hogarth, if you will not read them, they are surely going to ask questions from there as well, even if it is not mentioned here. This is something that you can learn from last year's question paper. Okay, then feminism is mentioned. So first wave of feminism, you can see feminism from two different ways: feminism as a movement, feminism as an ideology. So when you see feminism as a movement, there is first wave of feminism, second wave of feminism, third wave of feminism, even fourth wave of feminism. When you think about feminism as an ideology, there is liberal approach, there is radical approach, there is what you say eco criticism, so social approach, Marxist approach. So you can look at feminism from two different purposes. Now you see, there is eco-criticism, there is also a unit called eco-feminism, right? So you need to read about the eco-criticism in England and eco-criticism in America. You see, there are two branches, one in Britain, one in America. So writers associated with eco-criticism in America, and then writers associated with eco-criticism in Britain. Same goes with feminism, same goes with eco-feminism. So how these two theories are linked together. Okay, then you see post-colonialism as a literary criticism and theory. So you have Edward Said, Homi K. Bhabha, Franz Fanon and others as a theoretical writers. And then also post-colonialism mein you need to read about certain writers as well. Last year there was one question from Adichie. You need to read about Chinua Achebe and others. That means not only Caribbean writers but Australian writers and others, which are a part of what you say world literature. It is also part of comparative literature. When you say comparative literature, that means literature written from different countries. What Goethe called as word literature is what they are calling it as comparative literature. So major texts associated with comparative literature. And when you align this unit with this unit, you find writers from colonies. For example, Indian writers, their theoretical frameworks, South African writers, Nigerian writers, Canadian writers, Indian-born Canadian writers. You see Sam Salvodarai, Michael Ondaatje, who was awarded with 2018 Golden Booker Prize for the novel, very famous novel that you can think of, American Patient, right? So you can see this is also very interesting unit. It tells you that, it gives you a kind of suggestion that it is very short, but you need to give a lot of time in order to understand what are the theoretical concepts and the theories associated with post-colonialism. Okay, then if you want to know about certain terms associated with post-colonialism, we have covered them. There is a playlist that you will find in our channel. You can explore those terms. And then the 7th and 8th unit, you see reading comprehension. It was not mentioned in last syllabus that they have provided last year, but now there was a comprehension. Now they are going to ask, they used to ask these questions before as well when DU, JNU used to take their exam separately. So you'll have a probably 5 questions in reading comprehension, maybe in poetry form or in what to say, a passage in prose. It depends, maybe both, right? So 5 questions from prose comprehension, 5 questions from poetry, or maybe only one, depend upon their their thinking. Then you see the 7th unit, awareness of current literary trends, events and awards. There were around 4 to 5 questions related to awards. So different awards, for example, Sahitya Academy is there, Booker is there, Nobel is there, Pulitzer is there. These are 4 famous awards, but there are minor awards as well. So where they originated, in which year they started. There was one question I can think of. They asked about the beginning of different awards. और फॉर एग्जाम्पल पुलित्जर अवार्ड किस कंट्री में मिलता है, इंडिया का सबसे बड़ा अवार्ड क्या है, ज्ञानपीठ अवार्ड है, राइट, साहित्य अकेडमी अवार्ड है, तो किस किस लैंग्वेज में दिया जाता है, देन किसको किसको मिला, राइटर्स भी आप जब पढ़ते हो तो लास्ट ईयर देयर वाज वन क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम फ्रॉम ममंगदाई. I thought they are asking question because it's a regional writer and writing in English, but the real fact is, if you will check the Sahitya Academy in English, you will find he was awarded with Sahitya Academy award. That means maybe they were asking questions directly from the name of the writers, the name of the books that they have written, for which they were awarded with Sahitya Academy. Maybe you don't need to read them in detail, but you need to know in which year they were awarded Sahitya Academy award or Gyanpith award or any other award, and for which book. Maybe this will serve your purpose. So this is a very interesting unit. Now you see the new events that are taking place, new literary trends that are emerging. 6-word novel is one such thing that I was reading about it yesterday. Or you see diaspora, so new trends in diaspora, new events that are taking place in diaspora. You see very recently Salman Rushdie was attacked. So you need to know about the history of it, which novel he has written, for which you can see multiple times it has happened in the past. So the new trends is also something that is interesting that you need to know for your entrance examination. So as you can see, it on surface level it looks like that you can that it is a very easy question paper syllabus, but in depth when you will analyze it, you will find there is a lot that you need to read for your entrance examination. I hope it is clear to all of you. Now yes, we are also running a batch in our study capital platform. One batch is already done, and we are launching a crash course. So if you want to avail the course and want to read all those things, you can join our batch. Thank you so much.